Good morning. Today I will discuss chapter 4, types of major accounts. These are our learning competencies. First is to discuss the 5 major accounts. Second is to cite examples of each type of account. And next is prepare a chart of accounts. May tinatawag tayong the account or mas sikat siya sa tawag na T account. The account is an account which is the basic storage of information in accounting. It is a record of the increases and decreases in a specific term of asset, liability, equity, income, or expense. An account may be depicted through a T account. Kaya siya tinatawag na T account kasi hugis T siya. Ito, makikita mo dito sa may cash, hugis T siya. A T account has 3 parts. Account title, yun yung cash na nakikita nyo sa screen. It describes the specific item of asset, liability, equity, income, or expense. Specific siya. Anong asset siya? Cash yung makikita mo dyan. Makikita mo din na nahati siya sa 2 sides. May debit and credit. Debit ang tawag sa left side of the account and credit ang tawag sa right side of the account. Sa debit, basta lagi niyong tandaan, pag debit, naka-left side siya ng T account. It is sometimes referred to as the value received. Kung kunwari cash yung T account mo, kung magkano natatanggap mo, value received mo, ilalagay mo daw siya sa debit side or sa left side ng T account. Pag credit naman, or the right side of the T account, it is sometimes referred to as the value parted with. Pag value parted with, ibig sabihin, ito yung nilabas mong cash. Yun yung bawas. At the end of the T account, makikita mo yung balance. Balance is yung difference between the total debits and credits in the T account. For example, ito, 500 plus 1,000. Ang total debit mo is 1,500. Ang credit mo is 800. 1,500 minus 800. Ang balance na lang ng cash mo is 700 pesos. Bakit siya nasa left side or nasa debit side? Kasi yun yung mas malaking amount. If total debits exceed total credits, yung balance mo, ilalagay mo siya sa debit balance. Pero, kung ang total credit mo mas malaki kaysa sa total debits mo, syempre, ang balance mo ay isusulat mo sa credit side. Makikita nyo din na ang abbreviation ng debit ay DR, which means debere in Latin. And ang abbreviation ng credit ay CR, which is the Latin word of credere. Yan yung T account. And we have these 5 major accounts na na-discuss na rin ng konti sa accounting equation or in our previous chapter. We have assets, liabilities, equity, income, and expenses. The 5 major accounts, also called the elements of the financial statements, are actually the items in the expanded accounting equation discussed in the previous chapter. Let's recall these items. Assets are the economic resources you control that have resulted from past events and can provide you with economic benefits. Nabanggit ko na rin yan nung previous chapter. Liabilities are your present obligations that have resulted from past events and can require you to give up resources when settling them. Ito yung mga utang. Equity is assets minus liabilities. Income are increases in economic benefits during the period in the form of inflows or enhancements of assets or decreases of liabilities that result in increases in equity other than those relating to investments by the business owners. Yun yung income. Ngayon, may dalawang klase ng income. It includes revenue, and gains. Pag sinabing revenue, it arises in the ordinary course of business. For example, nagbenta ka ng goods na binebenta talaga ng business mo or nagbenta ka ng service mo kasi yun yung nature ng business mo. So, yun yung tinatawag na revenue. Pag gains naman, it represent other items that meet the definition of income and may or may not arise in the course of ordinary activities of an entity. So meron kang income pero hindi siya galing sa ordinary course of business mo. Yun yung tinatawag na gains. For example, your business sells barbecue. So the income you derive from selling barbecue is called revenue, sales revenue. Kasi yung binibenta mong barbecue is your main business or it is the ordinary business activity. Yun yung tinatawag na revenue. Ngayon, one day, you decided to replace your old beach umbrella. The umbrella has a carrying amount of 2,000 in your books of accounts. So, ang carrying amount niya is 2,000. Ano ba yung carrying amount? Yun yung net amount at which an item is carried in the books of accounts. So, yun yung value na lang niya. So, ang carrying amount niya or ang value na lang niya is 2,000. Ngayon, yung old umbrella mo na ang carrying amount ay 2,000, binenta mo ng 2,200. May kita ka ba? Meron kasi 2,000 lang yung value niya, binenta mo ng 2,200. So, meron kang kita na 200 pesos. At ang tawag mo sa kita na yon ay gain at hindi revenue. Bakit gain? Because it is not your main business or not your ordinary business activity. So, yun yung difference ng revenue and gains. Another element is the expenses. So expenses are decreases in economic benefits during the period in the form of decreases in assets or increases in liabilities that result in decreases in equity, excluding those relating to distributions to the business owner. So there are two types of expenses, pwedeng expenses or losses. Pag sinabing expenses, it arise in the course of the ordinary activities of a business. So pag losses naman, it represents other items that meet the definition of expenses and may or may not arise in the course of the ordinary activities of the entity. For example, dun sa barbecue business kanina, yung cost of the barbecue you have sold is an expense. Ibig sabihin ng cost yung nagastos mo sa karne, sa pag-marinade mo, sa barbecue stick, sa lahat ng yon, sa uling na ginamit mo, expenses yon. Kasi ginagamit mo siya para makagawa or makaluto ka ng barbecue mo. Expenses yon. Pero, kung babalikan natin yung kwento nung beach umbrella mo, kunwari yung carrying amount mo kanina, 2,000, di ba? Ngayon, nabenta mo lang siya ng 1,600. So, the difference now of 400, 2,000 minus 1,600, is, it represents a loss. Kasi palugi. So, bakit siya loss? Kasi mas mababa yung value nung pinagbentahan mo kaysa sa value niya, carrying amount niya. So, bakit hindi siya nilagay sa expenses? Bakit sa losses? Kasi yung pagkakabenta mo ng beach umbrella, it is not the ordinary course of business. Hindi mo siya na-incur ng dahil sa pagbebenta mo ng barbecue. Na-incur mo siya sa ibang bagay. Kaya, nasa losses siya. Notes. If selling price is greater than carrying amount, the difference is a gain. Parang kanina, 2,000 yung carrying amount mo. Nabenta mo ng 2,200. So, gain yon. Pero, kapag mas mababa ang selling price kaysa sa carrying amount, the difference is a loss. So, yun yung overview ng different, ng 5 major accounts. So, these are the classification of the 5 major accounts. So, under balance sheet accounts, may assets, liabilities, and equity. Under income statement accounts, may income and expenses. So, sa balance sheet, It is also called the statement of financial position. It is one of the components of a complete set of financial statements. So the balance sheet shows the financial position of a business. So magkano na ba ang asset ng isang business? Magkano yung total na utang niya? Magkano ang equity niya? So dun mo siya makikita sa balance sheet. On the other hand, yung income statement or tinatawag na statement of profit or loss, it is a subcomponent of the statement of comprehensive income, which is also one of the components of a complete set of financial statements. So, this income statement shows the profit or loss of a business. Dito mo makikita kung may profit ba siya, may kinita ba siya, or nalugi ba siya nung period na yon. So, yung financial statements na madidiscuss natin sa future. Meron din tayong tinatawag na chart of accounts. So, a chart of accounts is a list of all the accounts used by a business. So, ito yung, sa book niya, makikita niyo yung example ng chart of accounts. Ngayon, ito yung mga common account titles sa chart of accounts. Ito yung mga assets sa balance sheet. Ito yung mga liabilities. Ito yung equity. Ngayon, under income statement accounts, makikita nyo to income and expenses. So, let's discuss yung overview ng mga common account titles. So, first, na kind of asset is cash. So it includes money or its equivalent that is readily available for unrestricted use. For example, may pera ka, cash on hand ang tawag doon. Or may pera ka sa bangko na pwede mong i-withdraw anytime. Pagdating dito sa balance sheet mo, ang classification niya ay cash. So anything, cash on hand or cash mo sa bangko, basta pwede mo siyang magamit anytime. Ika-classify mo siya as cash. How about accounts receivable? It is a receivable which is supported by oral or informal promises to pay. For example, may binenta ka sa isang customer. Sabi niya, babayaran ko na lang yan next week kasi next week pa yung allowance ko. So, anong classification niya? Accounts receivable kasi oral lang yung promise to pay niya or informal lang siya. Another one is the allowance for bad debts. So, allowance for bad debts is the aggregate amount. Aggregate, ibig sabihin yun yung mga total amount na estimated losses mo from uncollectible accounts receivable. Another term is allowance for doubtful accounts. So, for example, may na-estimate ka last year na hindi mo na makokolekta sa client mo 10,000 pesos. This year, meron ka ulit 5,000 pesos. So, anong aggregate amount mo? 15,000 pesos. Yun na yung total allowance for bad debts mo or tinatawag din na allowance for doubtful accounts. Another common account is the notes receivable. So it is a receivable supported by written or formal promises to pay in the form of promissory notes. So kung may binenta ka sa isang customer mo at nagbigay siya ng written promissory note, hindi mo siya ika-classify as accounts receivable. Kasi sa accounts receivable, oral promise to pay lang siya. So dahil may promissory note at may written promise to pay, ika-classify mo siya as notes receivable. So another one which is not included in the PowerPoint is the inventory. So inventory represents the goods that are held for sale by a business. For a manufacturing business, inventory also includes goods undergoing the process of production and raw materials that will be consumed in the production process. For example, nagbebenta ka ng mga damit. So, yung mga damit na hindi mo pa nabebenta, ang classification niya ay inventory. Ngayon, paano kung ang business mo ay manufacturing? Gumagawa ka ng mga upuan. Ano ang ika-classify mo as inventory? So, yung mga kahoy na hindi mo pa napaprocess as upuan, inventory mo na yon pag manufacturing business ka. Ano pa? Yung mga upuan na hindi pa tapos, for example, kulang pa yung mga paa niya kasi hindi pa tapos, na pinaprocess pa lang siya, inventory mo na din yon. At yung mga upuan na tapos na at hindi mo pa nabebenta, inventory mo na din yon. So, yun yung mga inventories. Another one is the prepaid supplies. So, prepaid supplies represents the cost of unused office and other supplies. Take note, unused. So, kung bumili ka ng madaming bond paper sa office nyo at hindi mo pa nagagamit yung out of the 10,000 boxes, kunwari 10,000 boxes of bond paper, 8,000 boxes hindi mo pa nagagamit. So, yung 8,000 boxes na yon, dapat ang classification niya ay prepaid supplies. Another one is the prepaid rent. So, ito yung mga rent na binayaran mo in advance. So, ang keyword mo is prepaid. Binayaran mo in advance. So, prepaid rent. Nagbayad ka in advance ng renta. So, bakit siya asset? Siyempre, hindi mo pa kasi nagagamit yung renta. So, asset mo pa siya sa time na yon. Next is the prepaid insurance. So, prepaid insurance, ito din yung mga insurance na binayaran mo in advance. So, prepaid insurance. Next is land. So, land, ito yung mga lupa. The lot on which the building of the business has been constructed, or pwede rin namang mga vacant lot, which is to be used as future plant site. So, lagi niyong tandaan, land is not depreciable. Hindi bumababa yung value niya habang tumatagal. So, pag tinanong ka, ano ang asset na hindi depreciable? Land ang sagot. Ano ang properties? Property and equipment na hindi depreciable. So, land yon. Next is building. So, building is the structure owned by a business for use in its operation. So, kapag may building ang isang business, ang classification niya, of course, sa balance sheet ay building. Next is the accumulated depreciation building. So, it is the total amount of the depreciation expenses recognized since the building was acquired and made available for use. For example, nagpatayo ka ng building. Sabi mo, yung building na yon magagamit mo for 50 years, for example. So, during the first year, syempre may ibababa na siya ng value. For example, 10,000 ang binaba ng value niya sa first year. Second year, 10,000. Third year, 10,000. So, magkano ang accumulated depreciation na ni building after 3 years? So, ang answer is 30,000. So, ang accumulated depreciation is yung total na ibinaba na ng value niya as of the period. So, yun yung accumulated depreciation. Next is the equipment. So, pag sinabing equipment, it consists of various assets. Pwedeng machineries and other factory equipment. Pwedeng transportation equipment like the vehicle, delivery trucks. Pwedeng office equipment, the desks, the cabinets, the chairs. Pwedeng computer equipment. Pwedeng yung mga server, personal computers, laptops. Pwede rin namang furnitures and fixtures. Ito yung mga desks, cabinets, and other movable partitions. Last classification is the accumulated depreciation equipment. So it is the total amount of depreciation expenses recognized since the equipment was acquired and made available for use. Gaya nung example ko sa building. So, pag accumulated depreciation equipment naman, yun yung total na ibinaba na ng value ng equipment mula nung binili mo siya. So, collectively, pag pinagsama-sama mo si land, si building, and equipment, tinatawag siya na property, plant, and equipment or capital assets or fixed assets. Next is the liability. So, sinabi ko nga before, pag sinabi mong liabilities, utang siya. Ito yung mga different types of liabilities. First is the accounts payable. So, it is the obligations supported by oral or informal promises to pay by the debtor. Sample, nagbebenta ka ng barbecue, sabi mo, wala kasi akong pambayad ng mga karne. Pwedeng utang muna, bayaran ko next week. So, yun yung accounts payable. Verbal mo lang sinabi. Next is the notes payable. So, obligations supported by written or formal promises to pay by the debtor in the form of promissory notes. So, kapag may binigay na promissory note or may written promise to pay, ang classification niya ay notes payable. So, lagi niyong tandaan, kung may accounts receivable ka pag may utang sa yung customer, ang counterpart naman nun is accounts payable kung ikaw naman ang may utang. So, opposite siya. Accounts receivable and accounts payable. Anong pagkakaparehas nila? Parehas sila na oral or informal promise lang. So, next is, ganun din yung notes payable and notes receivable. Opposite siya. Yung notes receivable, utang sa'yo yon. Yung notes payable, ikaw naman ang may utang. Pero parehas sila na may promissory note or may written or formal promise to pay. Next is the interest payable. So it is the interest incurred but not yet paid. For example, may notes payable ka, ngayon obligado kang magbayad ng interest, pero hindi mo pa nababayaran. Utang mo pa rin siya. So, ang classification niya ay interest payable. Next is salaries payable. So, it is the salaries already earned by the employees but not yet paid by the business. So, sample, yung mga empleyado mo pumasok ng December 1 to December 15, pero papasweldohin mo pa lang sila ng December 15. So, salaries payable mo yung na-compute mo na sweldo nila from December 1 to 15. Next is the utilities payable. So utilities payable includes electricity, water, telephone, internet, cable TV, etc. na nagamit mo na pero hindi mo pa nababayaran. So yun yung utilities payable. Next is the unearned income. So, eto medyo nakakalito. Pag sinabing unearned income, it relates to income that were collected in advance before they are earned. So, after the earning process is completed, these items are transferred to income. Sample, meron kang customer, sabi niya, pa-order naman ako ng barbecue, paki-deliver sa bahay next week kasi may handaan. Pero ito na yung bayad ko sa'yo. So, binayaran ka niya in advance, pero hindi mo pa nabibigay sa kanya yung barbecue kasi next week pa yung delivery mo. Next week pa daw yung handaan nila, yung party. So, by the time na binayaran ka ng customer, may utang ka sa kanya. At ang tawag mo doon ay unearned income. Kasi kita mo na sana yun, pero hindi mo pa na-earn kasi hindi mo pa na-deliver sa kanya yung binibili niya sa'yo. So, yun yung unearned income. So, ito yung lagi yung tandaan. Pag nakita nyo yung word na receivable, ibig sabihin nun asset. Pag nakita nyo yung word na payable, ibig sabihin liability. So, yun. Next is the equity. So makikita dito sa equity yung owner's capital or owner's equity at owner's drawings. So sabi lang sa accounting, pag pinagbawas mo daw yung liabilities and assets or assets and liabilities, tawag daw doon ay equity. Ganun lang niya in-explain. Pero ano ba yung mga nakakapag-increase sa isang owner's capital? Siyempre, kapag may investment or contributions ang owner, tataas ang owner's equity, owner's capital mo. Kailan siya bababa? Kapag may withdrawal or kumuha siya ng distributions niya or withdraw niya yung distribution niya. Siyempre, mababawasan yung capital. Ano pa? Pag nagkaroon ng income or profit ang isang business, tataas din ang owner's capital niya. Pero kapag nagkaroon siya ng mga expenses or loss incurred sa business, bababa din yung owner's capital niya. Next is the owner's drawings. So owner's drawings is the account used to record the temporary withdrawals of the owner during the period. At the end of the accounting period, any balance in this account is close to the owner's capital account. For example, sabi nung may-ari, magwi-withdraw muna ako ng investment ko dito sa business. So, yung i-withdraw niya ay i-record sa owner's drawings. Pero at the end of the year, iko-close din yon sa owner's capital. So, these are the parts of the balance sheet. Sa income statement account naman, ito yung different types of income. So, may service fees. Sabi ko kanina, ito yung revenues earned from rendering services. Example, services sa isang spa, sa isang beauty salon, etc. Basta service yung binebenta mo, service fees yun. Pag sales naman, ito yung revenues earned from the sale of goods. For example, sale of barbecue, sale of souvenir items, etc. Pag interest income naman, it is the revenues earned from the issuance of interest-bearing receivables. For example, nagpautang ka sa isang tao, may interest. So, yung babayaran niyang interest sa'yo, ilalagay mo siya sa interest income. Next is gains. So, income earned from the sale of assets, except inventory, of course, or from enhancements of assets or decreases in liabilities that are not classified as revenue gains yon. Example kanina, yung sale ng beach umbrella, ang carrying amount mo 2,000, binenta mo ng 2,200. So, yung 200 pesos ay gain. Expenses. So, these are the different types of expenses. Cost of sales or cost of goods sold. So it represents the value of inventories that have been sold during the accounting period. For example, bumili ka ng mga damit na plano mong ibenta. Ngayon, binili mo siya ng 80 pesos isa. Binenta mo ng 100 pesos. So yung 100 pesos, sales mo yon. Pero yung 80 pesos, kung magkano mo binili yung mga damit, ang tawag doon ay cost of sales or cost of goods sold. Yun yung cost ng item na binebenta mo. So, yun yung cost of sales. Another item is the freight out. So, it represents the seller's costs of delivering goods to customers. So, other terms of freight out are delivery expense, transportation out, and carriage outwards. So, ito yung dahil nauuso yung deliver sa mga bahay-bahay, yung charge na binibigay sa'yo or yung sinisingil sa'yo na charge kapag may dineliver sa'yo na item, freight out yon. Salaries expense. So it represents the salaries earned by the employees for the services they have rendered during the accounting period. So yung sweldo nila, salaries expense yon. Rent expense, it represents the rentals that have been used during the accounting period. So kapag may rentang binayaran, rent expense. Utilities expense represents the cost of utilities, electricity, water, telephone, internet, cable TV, etc. that have been used during the accounting period. Pero, ma'am, pwede bang hindi pagsamasamahin sa utilities expense? Kunwari, ang gusto ko, electricity expense, water expense, technology and communication expense. Pwede rin naman. Pero most of the time, ang ginagamit lang nila ay utilities expense at magkakasama na doon. Next is supplies expense. So, ito yung mga cost ng supplies na nagamit na or use during the period. For example, yung 10,000 boxes of bond papers na example ko kanina, kung 8,000 doon ay unused, kung 8,000 boxes doon ay unused, ilalagay mo siya sa prepaid supplies. Pero yung 2,000 boxes na nagamit mo na, ilalagay mo siya sa supplies expense. Next is the bad debt expense. So it is the amount of estimated losses from the uncollectible accounts receivable during the period. Other term is doubtful accounts expense. So, pag bad debt expense, yun yung estimated mo na hindi mo na makokolekta for the year. Yung example ko kanina, may estimated uncollectible ka last year na 10,000 and this year 5,000. So, ang tanong, magkano ang bad debt expense mo last year? 10,000 pesos. Magkano ang bad debt expense mo this year? Ang answer is 5,000 pesos. Ma'am, bakit hindi 15,000? So, yung 15,000 na total, ang tawag kasi dun ay allowance for bad debts or allowance for doubtful accounts. Dahil total yon. Pero kung for the year lang, bad debts expense yon. Ganon din sa depreciation expense. So it is the portion of the cost of a depreciable asset. Example is building or equipment that has been allocated to the current accounting period. So kung magkano lang ibinaba ng value niya this year, yun yung depreciation expense. Kasi kung ito-total mo siya from the start, accumulated na yon, accumulated depreciation building na yon. Pero kung for the year lang, depreciation expense siya. Next is the advertising expense. So it represents the cost of promotional or marketing activities during the period. So pag yung mga binili mong tarpaulin, kunwari nagpa-advertise ka sa radyo, sa TV, so advertising expense yon. Next is the insurance expense. It represents the cost of insurance pertaining to the current accounting period. So kung magkano na yung insurance expense na nagamit mo ngayon, yun na yung insurance expense. Taxes and licenses. It represents the cost of business and local taxes required by the government for the conduct of business. For example, nagbayad ka ng mayor's permit, percentage taxes, community taxes, ganon. So, tinatawag yun na taxes and licenses. Next is the transportation and travel expense. So, transportation expenses represents the necessary ordinary cost of employees getting from one place to another which are reimbursable by the business. For example, inutusan mo yung empleyado mong mag-asikaso ng mga papeles. So, yung pamasahe niya, syempre babayaran yun ng business. I-record mo siya as transportation and travel expense. Yung iba, tinatawag siya na travel expense. Next is the interest expense. So it represents the cost of borrowing money. It is the price that a lender charges a borrower for the use of the lender's money. Other terms for interest expenses are finance costs and borrowing costs. So, anong kabaliktaran ng interest expense? Ito yung kabaliktaran niya ay interest income. So, kapag interest expense, ikaw naman yung magbabayad ng interest. Another one is the miscellaneous expense. So, it represents various small expenditures which do not warrant separate presentation. Kunwari, may nagastos ka na small amount lang, pero hindi mo maklasify sa kahit na ano ditong expenses. Nilalagay siya sa miscellaneous expense. Another one is losses. So, these are the expenses which may or may not arise from the ordinary course of business. So, pwedeng sale of assets, gaya nung example natin sa beach umbrella na binenta niya ng 1,600 kahit 2,000 lang yung value niya. So, may loss siya na 400. Ano pa? Decreases in the value of assets dahil na sira na dahil bumaba yung value niya dahil nasira or hindi na mapapakinabangan or nawala kasi nagkaroon ng sunog, nagkaroon ng earthquake, nagkaroon ng baha or other calamities. So, losses yon. So, lagi yung tandaan na pag ginamit yung term na earned, it relates to income. Pag ginamit naman yung term na incurred, it relates to expenses. Another one, pag narinig mo yung unused portion of a cost, asset yon. Pero pag narinig mo yung used portion, expense yon. Example, yung cost ng unused office supplies, asset yon under prepaid supplies. Yung cost ng office supplies na use na during the period is expense or supplies expense. So yan yung different types of major accounts. So let's try. A customer bought barbecue with 500 from your barbecue business. He told you that he will pay for it next week. So anong classification niya? Accounts receivable of 500 pesos. Another one. The customer with the 500 account receivable is broke. Wala siyang pera. You have estimated that you can only collect 420 from him. So, meron kang 80 pesos na hindi makokolekta. So, yung 80 pesos uncollectible account is recorded as bad debts expense and accumulated in the allowance for bad debts account. Another one. Your friend borrowed 1,000 from your barbecue business. So you required from him a written promissory note to repay the money within 30 days plus 1% monthly interest. So yung 1,000 na collectible mo, saan mo siya i-record? Sa notes receivable kasi may written promissory note. Next is, you purchase pork worth 1,000 to be marinated and sold as barbecue. So, saan mo ilalagay yung pinambili mo ng pork? Saan mo i-classify? It is recorded as inventory. Next is, you purchase table napkins worth 200 to be used in your barbecue operations. So, kung yung table napkins na yon ay unused pa, hindi pa nagagamit, i-record mo siya sa prepaid supplies. Pero once na nagamit mo na siya, i-record mo na siya sa supplies expense. Next, you are renting a space for your barbecue stand. So the lease contract required you to pay 10,000 rent in advance. Saan mo i-record yon? Sa prepaid rent. Pero pag nagamit mo na siya or na-incur mo na yung rent mo, i-record mo na siya sa rent expense. Next, you purchase a barbecue grill worth 1,000. Saan mo i-record yung barbecue grill? Sa equipment. Ngayon, sabi mo, yung equipment na yon, gagamitin mo lang siya ng 5 years. So, yung 1,000 mo na pinambili mo sa kanya, hahatiin mo siya into 5 years. Kasi ibig sabihin, every year may 200 pesos na ibinababa ng value niya. So, every year may 200 pesos kang depreciation expense. Pero, yung accumulated mo is nadadagdagan ng 200 every year. So, first year is 200, second year 400 na yung accumulated depreciation mo, third year is 600, fourth year is 800 na ang accumulated depreciation mo, at ang fifth year is 1,000 na yung accumulated depreciation mo. So, kung magkano yung nagiging total. Pero every year, ang nagiging depreciation expense mo lang is 200 pesos. Next, you ran out of inventory of barbecue, so you went to Mr. Porky's meat shop to buy pork. You don't have the available cash, so you promise orally that you will be paying for the pork worth 500 next week. So, saan may re-record yon? Sa accounts payable. So, next is, di ba meron kang utang na 1,000, kunwari umutang ka ng 1,200 na loan, nagbigay ka ng promissory note. Saan mo siya ilalagay? Sa notes payable. E paano kapag may interest na hindi mo pa nababayaran? So ilalagay mo siya sa interest payable. Next, by month end, total salaries earned by an employee during the month amounted to 8,000 pesos. Pero hindi pa niya nakukuha yung salary niya. So, saan mo ilalagay yon? Sa salaries payable. Next is, your electricity bill for the month of January amounted to 2,000. The bill is not yet paid. So, saan mo ilalagay yon? Utilities payable. Next, May na-receive kang order of barbecue worth 800. So the customer paid the sale price, pero sabi niya, i-deliver mo na lang next week. Saan mo ilalagay? Unearned income. So yung iba, para mas madali sa kanila, ang ginagamit nilang account title is advances from customers or unearned revenue. Next, you invested 800 to your barbecue business. Saan mo siya ilalagay? Owner's capital. Ngayon, you made temporary withdrawals of 200 from your barbecue business. Saan mo siya ilalagay? Owner's drawings. Next is, you sold barbecue worth 500. Saan mo ilalagay? Sales. After a month, you will have earned the 1% monthly interest on the loan na binigay mo sa isang friend mo. Saan mo ilalagay yung interest na yon sa pinautang mo? Interest income. Next is, the cost of the barbecue that was sold for 500 is 300 pesos. So, saan mo i-record yon? Yung cost of sales or cost of goods sold. Magkano? 300 pesos kasi yun yung cost ng barbecue. Next is freight out. Ito yung another example ng freight out. So sabi mo, yung business mo may hotline. So customers can order barbecue through phone call, text message, or Facebook Messenger. Ngayon, during the period, yung cost ng gasoline mo sa pagde-deliver ng barbecue, it is recorded as freight out. Next, you hired a helper in your barbecue business. Your employee earns compensation of 8,000 per month. So, saan mo ilalagay yon? Salaries expense. You are renting a space for your barbecue stand. The rent is 5,000 per month. So, saan mo ilalagay? Rent expense amounting to 5,000 pesos. Next is the utilities expense. Ito yung example niya. After a month of operations, your business received electricity bill of 2,000 and water bill of 200. Saan mo siya ilalagay? Utilities expense amounting to 2,200 pesos. Next, the cost of the table napkins used during the period amounted to 50 pesos. So, saan mo ilalagay yung 50 pesos? Sa supplies expense. Next, of your total amounts receivable of 500, you expected to collect only about 480. So, yung estimated mo na 20 pesos, ilalagay mo siya sa bad debts expense. Next, you paid Justin Bieber 5,000 to endorse your barbecue business. So, saan mo ilalagay yung bayad mo kay Justin Bieber? Saan mo siya i-record? Sa advertising expense amounting to 5,000 pesos. So, meron another one. You have obtained a 1-year fire insurance for your barbecue stand for 12,000 pesos. Saan mo siya ilalagay? Sa insurance expense kapag use mo na used or nagamit mo na yung portion ng insurance. During the period, you paid local taxes amounting to 500. So, saan mo siya i-record? Taxes and licenses. So, last, your barbecue grill is stolen. Oh no! So, saan mo i-record yun? Sa loss. So, yun lang yung different types of major accounts. So, any questions or reactions, mag-chat lang kayo sa GC natin or sa MS Teams. So, that will be the end of our Chapter 4, Types of Major Accounts.